Shadows of the assembly line. The morning tasted of burnt metal and stale coffee, a familiar bitterness Robert Williams had grown used to over the years. Walking the concrete corridor toward his station, he nodded at familiar faces, their greetings muffled beneath the rhythmic pounding of steel presses. The factory breathed around him, a living beast of iron and sweat, humming its relentless song of industry. Robert slipped on worn gloves, their leather cracked and molded from countless repetitions of the same tasks. Each morning he felt the weight of predictability settle comfortably on his shoulders, an ordinary anchor tethering him to the ground. He stepped in front of the massive robotic arm, its polished metal surface gleaming coldly beneath the fluorescent lights. The robot swung and twisted gracefully, a mechanical dancer performing its rehearsed choreography, assembling automotive parts with precision. Robert admired its efficiency, but sometimes wondered if the machine was aware of the life around it, or if he was just another cog in its indifferent rhythm. As he reached to adjust a misaligned panel, a sudden flicker caught his attention, a shadow gliding swiftly across the concrete floor, moving oddly against the overhead lights. He glanced upward, squinting, but saw nothing unusual, only the beams of the catwalk and the endless rows of fluorescent tubes. He shook off the small unease and returned to his task, dismissing it as a trick of tired eyes. Robert was accustomed to noise, the steady clamor of metal on metal, machinery grinding and hissing steam. Silence, when it came, was more disconcerting than any amount of chaos. He had just bent down to retrieve a dropped wrench when that eerie quiet enveloped him, sudden and absolute. The ordinary rattle of conveyor belts and clinking metal vanished as though someone had muted the world. His heartbeat quickened, loud in his ears. Then he heard it, just a whisper, a mechanical whirring, an unnatural, swift shift of gears. A shiver ran down his spine, and Robert instinctively looked up. The robotic arm, typically predictable in its movements, now hovered oddly still, twisted at an unfamiliar angle. He stood, wrench hanging loosely in his fingers, eyes fixed on the anomaly. Before he could call out or step back, the arm jerked violently forward, a flash of polished steel filling his vision. Time stretched, and in that frozen moment, Robert felt an impossible disbelief, a betrayal by the machine he trusted. Days after the incident, whispers crawled like insects through the factory, slipping into cracks, corners, and conversations. Robert had survived the accident, narrowly, sustaining only minor bruises and a shaken confidence. Yet the atmosphere around him had shifted drastically. Fellow workers eyed him differently, their gazes wary, distant. He overheard snippets of hushed talk at lunch breaks, rumors of budget cuts, rushed safety checks, and malfunctioning machines. A worn safety poster hung crookedly near the exit door, half torn, its bright colors faded and peeling. "Safety first," it proclaimed weakly, a hollow reminder of assurances that now felt meaningless. Each time Robert approached the robotic arm, his pulse quickened. Its smooth, effortless movements now seemed coldly indifferent, even aggressive. Management assured everyone it was an isolated glitch, nothing to worry about. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes watching him from behind office windows, evaluating his every hesitation, his every cautious step. He felt a tightening knot in his stomach, a subtle dread that seeped deeper every day, until he began questioning his own instincts and perceptions. Night shifts were quieter, lonelier, heavy with shadows. The factory assumed a ghostly presence, rows of dormant machinery looming in silent judgment. Robert knew the robotic arm was scheduled for maintenance, but deadlines were tight, Pressure's high. Management had quietly hinted at consequences if production slowed. Standing alone beneath harsh overhead lighting, Robert watched the machine closely, the memory of its sudden violence fresh in his mind. His eyes moved to the red emergency shutdown lever, a bright spot in the dimness. His heart pounded, uncertainty gnawing at the edges of his resolve. Pulling the lever would halt production, draw attention, perhaps cost him his job, but not acting meant risking worse. Another employee, less fortunate than he had been, could suffer a brutal fate. His fingers reached out, trembled, withdrew, then reached again, the lever's metal handle cold and unyielding beneath his touch. Drawing a deep, ragged breath, he closed his eyes, his mind flooded with images of coworkers, families, the faces of those who trusted him to do right. In one swift motion, he yanked downward. The machine groaned and slowed, its movements shuddering reluctantly into stillness. In the heavy silence that followed, Robert stood frozen, every muscle tense, waiting for consequences he knew would soon arrive. Robert left the factory not long after, carrying with him an emptiness heavier than he'd expected. He found himself returning often, standing outside the chain-link fence, watching the distant lights glow softly through dust-covered windows. The workstation remained empty, a still monument to his decision. Rumors persisted, management investigations, quiet dismissals, tightened regulations, yet nothing seemed fully resolved. The robotic arm remained motionless, suspended in a permanent pause, a ghostly presence haunting the factory floor. Robert continued his life elsewhere, working quieter jobs, but the memory lingered, a quiet shadow in his mind. Occasionally, he would wake in the night, heart racing, believing he felt again the cold rush of metal toward his face. Yet in daylight, he moved forward, trying to leave behind the weight of that choice. Still, he knew something was irrevocably altered. Routine tasks, pouring coffee, sweeping floors, now carried an echo of unease, a subtle awareness of fragility. He realized he had become someone who noticed shadows, who sensed invisible dangers others ignored, forever changed by the quiet consequences of one night's courage. 30 years later, a young woman stood at the rusted gate of the abandoned factory, her fingers tracing corroded metal links, eyes scanning empty windows. She'd heard whispers in town, stories of accidents and quiet bravery, tales passed down in hushed voices. The wind stirred her hair gently, carrying with it a lingering scent of metal and rust. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined the lives that had passed through this place, the whispers left behind. Opening them again, she stepped away slowly, footsteps echoing softly, leaving behind the old ghosts that still breathed quietly in the shadows of the assembly line.